Hi everyone, my name is Seth and I run SimpleSCOTUS on Twitter, and today I'm going to talk about a case that hits close to home as someone with an earring in the right ear. My right to marriage in the United States recognized at a federal level. Believe it or not, only 10 years ago. It's kind of crazy. It's a decision that had precedent in Loving v. Virginia, um, precedent in Griswold v. Connecticut, precedent in Turner v. Safley, and these are all cases that we'll talk about later, but essentially it enshrines that right for another group. It enshrines that for gay and lesbians. Um, and what I have here is I have some images that I'm going to cut out and explain as we go what's going on. There were 4 states that were sued by 14 couples and 2 men whose husbands had passed away before the case had been heard. And so these 14 couples sued these 4 states. And so the 4 states were Ohio, Kentucky, Michigan, and Tennessee. And so they had laws that defined marriage as one man, one woman. Classic. And they also had laws in the books that said that if you were married in a state that did recognize same-sex marriages, it didn't matter. It wouldn't be recognized in their state. So even if you left and went to another state to get married, it didn't matter. You weren't going to get any recognition by the state that you resided in. And so these 14 couples and these 2 men whose husbands had passed away all sued. And the claim was basically that it violated their 14th Amendment right. And so, sorry, I'm reading off some notes. I can't memorize this all in my head, but I've cut out, this is Jim Obergefell. So this is the main guy of the case. This is the Obergefell legend, okay, and you can see, I mean, kind of, but there's a picture in the background of him and his husband who passed away. And so district courts heard these cases as happens in the United States, and they all ruled in favor of these same-sex couples, including Jim Obergefell. They said, yeah, you have a fundamental right to marriage. Then got to the circuit court. It was appealed to the circuit court, and that was where it was consolidated. So all these 16 cases, I think it was 16 cases, were consolidated under Obergefell's name. So it essentially became Obergefell versus the state of Ohio, which was Hodges. And he was, I think now he's friends with Jim Obergefell. Some people are stronger than I am, but I don't think I could do that. But anyway, district courts ruled in their favor, circuit court overrules, and so it makes it to the Supreme Court. And so for Jim, Jim had traveled from Ohio to Maryland to be married to his husband who was dying. He had ALS and couldn't move, so he was married in a hospital in Maryland. And when his husband had passed away, he returned to Ohio. Or I'm not sure if they returned to Ohio, but anyway, he's in Ohio, and he's trying to receive a death certificate from the state of Ohio. And Ohio is not going to recognize this marriage that happened in Maryland, and they will not put him on the death certificate. So because of this, I mean, it's not just marriage. This is the thing, and this is one of the cruxes of the case, is that the right to marriage is obviously a lot more than just having a wedding. It's being able to call that person your widow, or be a widow for that person once they pass away, and be recognized in death with them. And it's interesting because one of the main arguments you see from Justice Kennedy, who we'll talk about later, is that this is something that strengthens marriage. And you see a lot of conservatives at the time were arguing that any recognition of same-sex marriage, they'd start marrying dogs and cats and whatever. It would degrade marriage to the point where it wouldn't matter. Um, but Justice Kennedy, really early on, um, addresses this and frames it as legalizing same-sex marriage, recognizing it by all 50 states, does not degrade it, but it strengthens it. It promotes uh, couples to have long-term stable relationships, potentially adopt children, raise them in a stable family environment. These are not things that are changing necessarily what marriage means. Um, it's just allowing it for more people. Um, and it's a fundamental recognition, essentially, that although this has been recognized obviously in previous cases, well, Bars v. Hardwick, it was ruled that there is no right to have sex with a man if you're a man. That's not recognized. And Lawrence v. Texas in 2003, that is overturned. And so it had already been established that same-sex individuals have a fundamental right to exist, essentially. Let me cut some more pictures out. So we got Jim Obergefell here. Actually, let me write down. So essentially, Jim Obergefell, yeah, can't marry his husband. Sorry, I'm gonna have to say it again while I'm gluing this in. Can't marry his husband. He's like, bro. It's like, bro, I just want to like I'm not in an envious position, you know? Like, he's not in a place where it's like, God, like, I mean, his husband has passed away. He's not asking for much here. He's asking to be put on a damn death certificate. Let's see. Sorry, guys, I'm like arts and crafting right now. This is actually really fun, I'm gonna be honest. I'm having a lot of fun right now. One thing we should talk about, actually, we'll get to that later. Let's talk about the ruling. Let me cut out I'm gonna cut out the little Supreme Court here. This is so stupid. Guys, I'm like, I need to make other content. I'm not gonna lie. So this is where we are. It's me making arts and crafts version of the memes that I make on Twitter. It's actually really fun. I'm not gonna lie. I was really excited. I had this idea at like 9 this morning. Like when I woke up, I was like, wait. I love cutting stuff out. Anyway. So, it's a 5-4 ruling. Very close. And this is the thing about Supreme Court cases that is really kind of disturbing, is that we're always one election away from cases like this being different, right? If one of these justices had retired, one of the liberal justices had retired or passed away for some reason, this would be a different case. And you would have people like Scalia writing this damn decision. And he wrote some decisions. Oh my God. We'll get to those another time. I don't really want to talk about him much. I'm not gonna lie. I'm sick of him. It's been a few years. I'm still sick of him. Anyway. So SCOTUS is like, well, of course you can marry. It's more complicated than that, though. So, Kennedy basically argues that marriage has changed its definition over the years, right? So, he cites Loving v. Virginia, which redefines marriage. It doesn't even redefine it. This is the thing. It just recognizes another group of people that can participate in it. So Loving v. Virginia is interracial marriage. And that is argued on the grounds of due process and equal protection as well. Same arguments. Also Griswold v. Connecticut. So Griswold v. Connecticut recognizes the right of married couples to use contraception. And it's kind of ridiculous that's even thing. But essentially, what the 14th Amendment has been framed as by liberal justices on the court is it's a right to privacy, and that the state can't enforce itself and impose itself on you in private matters where you have the right to make a decision. Now, people like Scalia are like blowing their brains out because of this argument. They're like genuinely thinks it's the downfall of America to make this argument. But the due process clause essentially is used to say that you have a right to privacy, and that the state has to respect your personal identity. It has to respect your beliefs, which I wouldn't really use in this scenario. I think Kennedy says something like your personal choice to your identity, which is a little whatever, but there's also Turner v. Safley, which recognizes the right of marriage to prisoners. So all these cases essentially build up precedent to say that marriage is an inherent right. It's recognized by the court as an inherent right. And that's why precedent is important in the Supreme Court, because they like to listen to themselves. Precedent also protects, this is another argument that he makes, is that precedent protects the right for you to not have children as well. So couples don't have to procreate in order to have value in their relationship, which is essentially used as that can't be a barrier to marriage. You can't require people to have the ability to have kids, because there are people that just can't have children, regardless of what kind of relationship they're in. So that can be a barrier. So that's another argument that a lot of conservatives made, that marriage is for, marriage is for, I shouldn't put the voice on. Marriage is for making a family, and Kennedy says that's ridiculous. So yeah, the equal protection and due process clauses are what's used, and let's start going, actually. One of the main critiques of Obergefell by conservatives, and in hindsight, I think it's changed a little bit to be less on the nose homophobic, but it was, well, democracy has to run its course, and the legislature has to decide whether same-sex marriage is legal in the United States. The legislature of each state has to decide for themselves. This is a ridiculous argument if you think about it for like 5 seconds, that no, there are rights that we don't need to legislate. There's inherent things that we recognize as having value that can't be granted by a legislature. And conservatives, for the most part, should agree with that. But we know that they love to pick and choose what kind of people get that protection. So, Justice Kennedy actually makes a pretty empathetic argument. It's an argument based on empathy, and I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing in a case where you're dealing with whether people can be recognized after death with their partner. It's a case that requires understanding the personal aspect, which Scalia absolutely rejects. He could give a fuck if your husband died and you want to be recognized. He's like, well, did the Ohio State House say so? Sorry. It just slips out sometimes. The voice just slips out, sorry. But Kennedy says there are people being harmed by this that shouldn't have to wait for a legislature to say your suffering can stop now. That's just not how fundamental rights work. He has this good quote that by statute, they as in Obergefell and his husband, they must remain strangers in the eye of the law, right? They're, even in death, they're strangers, despite having decades of connection and living a life together and being at his bedside while he dies. the state doesn't care because the legislature didn't say so. Sorry. I gotta stop doing that. It's very elitist of me. This looks really bad. My cutting is not good in these scissors. I found these scissors actually today. I don't know. They're really small, but I was like, oh, I'm cutting out small things. I'm gonna get different scissors. I'm not cutting these out in a good way. Looks sloppy. Wait, let me talk about Scalia first, and then we'll get to the best part. Let me find other scissors. Okay, I should get better scissors. So, Scalia, I know. Scalia, this dick, he writes this frantic opinion, or dissent. So Chief Justice Roberts writes the main dissent to this, and he says basically that the court has no right to get involved in this. This is not, a case that we can decide about. We don't have any say in this because we're not politicians. We're just judges, which is really, it's just so blatantly homophobic. And I know it doesn't sound like it on face value, but it is a delegitimizing of same-sex relations, because the right to marriage is recognized by the Supreme Court, whether you want to admit it or not. And there's people like Amy Coney Barrett who don't think that it has a strong legal framework, and she said this in an immigration decision recently. Can't remember the exact case, but she essentially said there's no historical precedent for marriage as a right, which is baffling when Loving v. Virginia is right there. So Scalia goes on this rant about how, the public debate of same-sex marriage, that is democracy at its best. It's the greatest show of democracy that we've seen. And it's a ridiculous, I don't have to explain why that's, I don't think I have to explain why that's ridiculous. Because we don't say that about any other civil right case. I mean, maybe Scalia would. But it's generally recognized, as I think most Americans would agree, that fundamental rights shouldn't have to be voted on. There are certain things that shouldn't be. It shouldn't be whether your right is popular or not to the majority. But the thing is, the really scary thing is that Scalia is so jerked off by conservatives. He is adored by conservatives. It's scary because the present court is comprised of Federalist judges who loved him as well, Yeah. And it's scary now that we have a 6-3 court that is made up of individuals like that. And it's scary as well because given the language of Amy Coney Barrett, for example, that marriage does not have a recognized place in judicial history, is that it's not just same-sex marriage. And obviously that should be enough for people. If same-sex marriage goes in the next few years with a conservative majority, that is potentially going to be exacerbated by, well, God knows if the fucking courts are even like a thing anymore. Sorry. But if Obergefell goes, the precedents that are listed in this, the Loving v. Virginia, Turner v. Safley, Griswold v. Connecticut, these are all cases that are under threat. Because if you're making an argument against Obergefell, you're making an argument against the fundamental right to marriage. Um, because these other cases use the same argument. But regardless, it's gonna be good. My favorite bit. Now that we've talked about the scary stuff, so Kennedy, long time justice at this point. He retires during Trump's administration. He's a conservative. So again, don't laud him as a hero, but he ate this one thing. He ate a few times, but ultimately, you're resigning under Trump. You're retiring under Trump. Like, anyway, this is the guy that appointed him. Girl. It's so funny though. Like, I mean, if you don't know this bitch, I mean, this man is responsible for the deaths of tens of thousands of gay people during his presidency. There was a time when, during the AIDS crisis, his press secretary was asked, you know, what are you gonna do about the AIDS epidemic that's going on? Which, of course, they didn't really recognize until a few years on. And this press secretary laughed and was like, well, are you gay? Like, it's just ridiculous. They made a mockery of a health crisis, and it was because it was predominantly targeting gay individuals. Now you'll hear some of these elusive gay Republicans who will say, well, Reagan was in Hollywood for a while, and he had a lot of friends that were gay, and da 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 da. I mean, tell me if I'm wrong, but like, if you're responsible for tens of thousands of people dying, I don't give a fuck what you even like. If you could be the most, you could be calling for same-sex marriage, and I'd still call you a homophobe. So anyway, this bitch is responsible, essentially. I mean, I know it's like a backwards way of, it's a roundabout way, but essentially, Ronald Reagan is responsible for putting the man that enshrined same-sex marriage, for now, into federal law. Which I just think is so funny. So I have Reagan here. And so, my first post on SCOTUS is a little controversial because, essentially I did depict, hold on, let me just draw this real quick. Let's just say I have a little special place for this little guy on here. I don't feel bad about what I'm about to show you because for so long, gay people have been told that they're going to hell and they're burning in hell for loving who they love. And I know it sounds corny, but apparently we have to return to like 2015 woke at this point, but they hate people for nothing more than trying to find someone that they love and tell me and others like me that we're going to wind up in hell for XYZ and just living our lives. And that's bullshit, So I decided to put him down in the hell there. So there you go. There's my version, my arts and crafts version of Obergefell v. Hodges. My favorite case. But let's talk about one other thing actually before we go, because there is something about this case that is a little um, disappointing in hindsight, not because of the case itself, but because of what it made liberals feel. And liberals were I mean, you're at the end of Obama at this point, 2015. Trump's announcing his run, and liberals interpreted Obergefell as, well, there you go. You know, our court will fundamentally recognize people's rights. You know, even the conservative appointed by Reagan will recognize certain rights because our court is objective and it's fair, and this is the way that we secure our rights. And of course, the Supreme Court is important, and that's why presidential elections are so important, because the president has really the sole power. Obviously, the Senate advises and consents, but at the end of the day, the president is the one nominating. And it made liberals feel like it didn't really matter if people even believed what the court was ruling on. And it's a double-edged sword, because at the end of the day, it should not depend on how popular rights are. It should not depend on whether people, you know, think that you have a right or not. Like, that's not how law should work. But we fucked up. Because while we were celebrating this, while we were like, well, thank God, we don't have to worry about abortion or any of these things, the court will always recognize precedent and side with the right thing. I mean, look where we are now. So it made liberals complacent. It made, and Roe as well. I mean, yes, it's good that the court is deciding these things, but this was, again, to emphasize, this was one justice away from being written by Roberts or Scalia and getting an opinion that is probably vile in its language and its dehumanization of people. And liberals really didn't, they missed that part, you know? This was not a safe, you know, win. And now we are where we are. And it's scary. It's scary. And it's not just gay marriage. Listen, I'll survive without my right to marry. As much as I don't want to say that. But there's so many other precedents that we take for granted already that have been overturned. I mean, even Chevron, just the ability for departments established by Congress to do their job, that's gone. And now we have dismantling of those same departments. Anyway, everything's depressing these days, so that's where I'll end it. I hope you guys enjoyed my first. I was gonna make a TikTok originally, but I think this was better. I think this was a better choice. I probably will edit this in some way into a TikTok, unfortunately, but sue me. But YouTube is just not, it's not there these days. I don't know. Maybe people will like this. I don't know. But I'll see you guys with another case, hopefully sometime, if you guys enjoyed this. And yeah, let me know. So, I'll see you guys.